Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Jacob Heilbrunn, who is a senior editor at The National Interest, a columnist for The Spectator, and the author of They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons. Previously, he was an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times and a senior editor at The New Republic, and he has an article at the New York Review of Books, The Hawks Ascending. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jacob Heilbrunn.
Thank you, Ian.
So, given that the Hawks are all excited about this war in Ukraine in the sense that many feel vindicated and others are piling on, but then you have, on the right, you have people like Colonel McGregor, who I've spoken to in the past. He's a pretty odd character. You spoke with him as well, vilifying Zelensky, along with Fox News' Tucker Carlson and Congressman Madison Cawthorn as well. So it's a mixed bag. So let me start with what's happening with Biden, though. Do you think that he's come up and a little bit up in the polls lately because of his handling of the Russia-Ukraine situation? But as the Western audience and the American audience watch helplessly as Ukrainian citizens are slaughtered, do you think that's going to put more and more pressure on Biden to do something when he's obviously circumscribed by fear of provoking anything that could spark a nuclear war?
I think Biden has actually done quite a bit. He's coming under fire from the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party, which includes Senator Tom Cotton, Representative Liz Cheney, and Senator Lindsey Graham, are all depicting Biden as too weak in confronting Putin's war in Ukraine. At the same time, you have the liberal hawks in the Democratic Party, such as former Obama administration defense official Evelyn Farkas and others who are complaining that the Biden administration is not enforcing a no-fly zone in Ukraine. Now, I think Biden so far has split the difference. He grew up during the Cold War. He served in office during the Cold War. So he remembers that there are red lines for each side that neither was willing to cross. And Biden has made it abundantly clear that if the Russians attack any NATO country, there will be an immediate and significant response. Ukraine simply is not a member of NATO. We have no formal alliance with it. So he is supplying it with hundreds of millions of dollars of weaponry. And I think that Biden so far has got it right.
So is it, though, likely to get tougher for Biden? Because do you think the American public are going to demand something gets done as they watch people being helplessly slaughtered?
I don't know. The flip side of that is that the American public is not eager to become embroiled directly in another war abroad, even if this one is in Europe rather than the Middle East. And I think Biden's poll ratings have risen because he has handled it so deftly until now. The hawks in each party will certainly continue to decry what they will depict as Biden's caution and pusillanimity in the face of evil. If Putin employs chemical weapons in Ukraine, for example, then it could start to become dicier for Biden.
Well, there was a poll recently that had 65% of Americans, I believe, believing that had Trump been in power, the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened.
Well, that is obviously complete flapdoodle. Well, it isn't to the extent that Trump would have handed Ukraine, perhaps even Alaska, back to Putin on a silver platter. Right. His entire presidency consisted of relentlessly toadying to Putin. We don't know exactly why, but he did. His administration did pass sanctions against Russia. The officials underneath Trump did pursue, in contradiction to his own policies or expressed wishes, a tough line on Russia. But the notion that Trump himself would in any way have deterred Vladimir Putin is completely nonsensical.
So Trump has changed his tune a little bit on Ukraine, but not on Putin. He's still praising Putin, along with Mike Pompeo, by the way. He's former Secretary of State.
It is amazing that Trump, for example, the other day said that Putin attacked Ukraine, quote, out of love, unquote. Now, whether that's simply an expression of the primitiveness of Trump's own thinking or something else, I don't know. But the fact is that Donald Trump worships Vladimir Putin. He sees him, he idolizes him. He sees him as the kind of leader that he would like to be here in the United States.
Well, there have been, prior to that, of course, in your article, you mentioned that back in 2017, Christopher Caldwell, a former senior editor at the Weekly Standard and a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, said, if we were to use traditional measures for understanding leaders, which involves the defense of borders and national flourishing, Putin would count as the preeminent statesman of our time on the world stage. Who can vie with him? Only perhaps Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. What are they saying that lately, these people?
Even at the time, this view could only be described as highly eccentric. There is a segment of the conservatives, many of them call themselves national conservatives, who view the United States as a decadent Western country that has been captured by liberals who are foisting gay rights, transgender rights, and feminism on the United States and weakening the moral fiber of the country so that a woke military can't even compete abroad. This was the line. They hailed leaders like Putin and Hungary's Viktor Orban as enlightened sentinels of traditional Western values. Putin and Orban are supposedly the heroes, while Biden is the enemy. That's what Tucker Carlson is essentially espousing night after night on Fox News, and small wonder that he's excerpted regularly on Russian state television.
So their belief system then is that Putin withdrew his alliance with the conservative, ultra-conservative Russian Orthodox Church, is the kind of Western hero of the last redoubt of the white man against the Muslims, against gays, and all in favor of traditional family values and Christian family values. Is that the tie?
Yes, they couldn't. They are traipsing over to Hungary, or a lot of conservatives have been traipsing over to Hungary and spouting exactly that line. And what some of them, the intellectuals, may be loath to explicitly acknowledge, but let's face it, there's a good dose of white nationalism percolating below this intellectual veneer that they have constructed. It reminds me of the left-wing fellow travelers who traipsed over to the Soviet Union during the 1930s and claimed that they had seen the future. That's what they were saying about Hungary, and even about Putin, that these guys are the avatars of the way to hold together Western society, and that we need to smash the institutions in the United States and get back to the good old glory days of the 1950s, when, incidentally, minorities had few, if any, rights in this country.
Well, there was a BBC reporter a while back interviewed one of these pro-Russian fighters in Donetsk, in the Donbass, and asked him why he was fighting against his Ukrainian brothers. And he said, because the Ukrainian government is going to force me to marry a man. So I find it extraordinary, though, that anybody on the political left in this country supports Putin. I mean, he's a far right-winger. He's a champion of the international right-wing movement. There was a big gathering of all the right-wing leaders and neo-Nazis and white supremacists from around the world recently in St. Petersburg. What more evidence do we need that Putin is a right-winger? So why do some Americans on the left support him?
Well, I think they believe that the United States is a militaristic society, that we are to blame because of NATO expansion, and that we forced Russia into a corner, and that Putin represents an alternative to the American empire. If you look at the way Putin is conducting the war in Ukraine, this seems wholly far-fetched to me. I mean, he is essentially doing what he did in Chechnya and Syria, engaging in massive war crimes, even if the media is so far reluctant to use that word. But he's deliberately targeting civilians for destruction. The United States doesn't wage war like that anymore. We did in World War II, and realized that it's not only immoral but ineffective. So I am. It's appalling if anyone would take that stance, whether on the right or the left, but they do.
So what about then the hawks like the Tom Cottons and others that are trying to push Biden into God knows what, deploying soldiers, no-fly zones, all of that sort of reckless stuff that they're demanding? That's not going to go away. That's going to intensify, isn't it?
They will certainly try. I think Biden is pretty tough. If you look at the Afghan pullout, he overruled all his advisors and insisted on departing from Afghanistan, which I think was the right call. Whether you can quarrel about the execution, but imagine if we were still mired in Afghanistan and trying to deal with this crisis in Ukraine. I just don't think it's tenable. The right will be trying to depict Biden as the new Jimmy Carter, someone under whose presidency gas prices are soaring and where foreign powers willy-nilly are running roughshod over American friends and allies. But again, so far Biden has taken pretty tough, strong measures. I mean, we don't know how the Russian economy is going to hold up under these sanctions. They may default on their bonds soon. You see stories that there is struggles for basic food supplies in Russia. It is not to be precluded that the country will collapse. I don't know if it will, but it is certainly under tremendous pressure. Couple that with a blitzkrieg that has turned into a sitzkrieg, which means a sitting war. I mean, the Russians are not making the kind of progress that they anticipated. To me, it looks like Putin was surrounded by his own version of neocons who told him that this war in Ukraine would be a cakewalk. And thanks to the heroic efforts of the Ukrainian army, it has turned out to be anything but.
So where are we heading, though, in terms of Biden making it clear that what is happening here is a war between democracy and autocracy, and that's that in our post-Cold War world, without ideology, except maybe with Xi Jinping trying to go back to the days of Mao Zedong, but Putin has no ideology. And the real battle lines in the world today are between democracy and the rule of law and autocracy and kleptocracy. And that, to me, is what's at stake here, because Putin, for all the talk about NATO expansion, he's really more concerned about Ukraine joining the EU and becoming a part of Europe, because he doesn't want to have a democracy on his doorstep, because that will infect his autocracy, and he has to give the Russian people bread and circuses in order to distract them from the fact that him and his cronies are stealing the country blind. And now they've had to dispense with any kind of form of pretense that there's any freedom of the press now. So they're going back to full kind of Stalinist control. And I don't know how long that's going to last, particularly, as you point out, with an economy in collapse. But these are the battle lines, and I just don't feel that Biden is making it clear that the Ukrainians are fighting and dying for democracy. And here in our country, we're letting democracy slip through our fingers as the Republicans engage in massive voter suppression.
There are two things that Biden can do. One is that he is apparently considering a visit to Europe, which I think would help. You have the heads of Central European countries heading to Kiev today. I think Biden should travel to Europe, and he can address the German Bundestag or Parliament. He could also travel to Paris and London and make speeches there. The second thing that I think he should do is to deliver a national address to the American people, explaining what the stakes are, what the sacrifices will be, how he intends to conduct this conflict, and why it is pivotal to protecting not only Ukrainian freedoms, but also Western ones.
So you feel that that's coming, or you wish it were coming?
I think the trip to Europe is coming. I think he's going to have to give an address to the American people, and perhaps it should already have taken place.
But what can be done to smoke out who Trump really is? That he's, as the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said, Vladimir Putin is Donald Trump's case officer. I mean, it's been obvious for some time that Putin has something over Trump, and we could go into it if you like, but it's so obvious now that he is praising this guy and saying that he was too soft on the Ukrainians. I mean, what planet is this man on? So is anything going to happen with Trump and with Tucker Carlson? Tucker Carlson is now a feature on Russian propaganda, their main Channel 1 news. I mean, they play him all the time. He's like their star. He should be ashamed. I mean, but obviously, I don't know what's going on at Fox. Do you? I mean, I don't. Where the Murdochs? I mean, the guy that's supposed to be running it, Lachlan Murdoch, is living in Australia now. And as far as I know, Viet Ding runs the place. What kind of editorial? Do they have any editorial control or not? I mean, is this just Tucker Carlson's out there on his own, spreading Russian propaganda, and that's okay with the Murdochs? I don't get it.
Well, as this conflict grinds on, I think both Carlson and even more Trump are taking body blows. There are articles. There was an article in the NBC news site yesterday saying that the America First in the Midwest is starting to buckle over the conflict in Ukraine. You're seeing lots of towns and cities displaying Ukrainian flags and paraphernalia. I think that the wind has been taken out of the sails of Trump, and Putin served as a valuable ally to him in the 2016 election, and he constantly tried to curry favor with him. Now Putin has become an international pariah, and it will be much harder, maybe even impossible, for Trump to make the case in foreign policy that his America First doctrine is a viable way of protecting American security. I think that truly is coming to an end. There will be a battle royale in the Republican Party, but already you can see the opportunists who want to take Trump's place, such as Tom Cotton, are pushing a much more vigorous foreign policy line than Trump himself. The only way that Trump could succeed in an upcoming election would be if the American economy craters. But I don't think foreign policy will redound to his benefit. Look, the hawks in the Republican Party are on the ascendant. The America First are on the back foot right now, and I'm skeptical that that's going to change.
Well, Jacob Heilbrunn, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jacob Heilbrunn, who's a senior editor at the National Interest and a columnist for the Spectator, and the author of They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons. Previously, he was an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times and a senior editor at the New Republic. And he has an article at the New York Review of Books, The Hawks